everyone. You're back with Mind Body Solutions and the MBS crew. Amy, Sue, Poppy, Bethany will come in later. This video it's a 2-video set on reference, using reference both touch and non-touch in trying to help facilitate the experience of asana. This one's going to be more on non-touch. And there are reasons for that. There are certain contexts in which touch isn't appropriate, or it's not available, it's not useful. And so this is going to be more about props. The point is, both as a student and as a teacher, you're going to have to master or learn about each, because both touch and non-touch do different things, create different sensations, and they both need to be mastered. There are many forms of non-touch reference. Your voice is a form of non-touch reference. Muscular action is. Movement is. Gravity shifts. Breath. Think about all the ways in your own yoga experience that you gain reference. And obviously movement is one too. All right, so we're going to show a quick couple of things that accentuate grounding, but are actually ways of utilizing props. But there are both pros and cons of non-touch. Obviously, non-touch is really an advantage to help direct self-practice, obviously in certain contexts where touch isn't available. And so self-practice and the appropriateness are two advantages to non-touch. But there's a downside too. There's inanimate objects don't reveal the inside of yoga quite as well. And they also don't allow the feeling for the connection from inside out. And then finally, especially with people with disabilities, depending on what they are, it's hard to use props. So like think about someone that's had a stroke and is paralyzed in one hand. They might not be able to use a belt. And the other thing that happens when it's a prop heavy practice, because remember the reference of something helps the mind into the body, so it's important. But the problem is if it's prop heavy and I as a person with disability am struggling to actually use them, it crashes my head into my disability. It takes too long. So that's another downside. But you have to master both sides. So here we're going to put sandbags on the feet. This would be going back to the grounding video, passive grounding. So Amy turn and face this way. Bethany's going to come in and said she's going to have her feet together. And there's going to be the reference that you can't get by thinking about it of the block. Look how carefully she did that. Now that's a spreading of the feet, a feeling of space in the feet, a comfort, and there's a lift that comes off of that. That form of reference shows you and reveals to you the subtle body in a way that you can't do without the sandbag. And then it comes off. You always teach with contrast because we're trying to get the mind to make it to the party. She's got to now feel both. Okay, so that's the more passive way of having grounding. But then you have to instruct the sensation change into the pose. And that's always going to be how these things work. All right, so then Amy's going to grab a block and put it between her feet. So this is going to create more activation. Now, if she were standing just with her feet together, she'd have a harder time. The addition of the block creates more tactile sensation down her skin of her foot. So she's got more reference coming from the body to the brain that the mind can then jump on the train of sensation. Right, so this is already a form, now a form of reference. Now, when she squeezes into the block this way, the thigh muscles have to engage and squeeze, not just the ankles, and that creates another form of reference, which then allows for the sensation of the up to become more active. And of course, I'm going to instruct her down, and then the final piece of this is her to be squeezing the block and lengthening consciously down the inseam of her foot as she hits down, rises up, right? Because now intelligence, she doesn't just get to use her will to squeeze the block with her will. She has to squeeze with her will and do something else, which engages a different action and a more subtle action in her legs, which creates a form of reference up, which then she goes up and she contrasts with an extension down. So all these things, remember, we're trying to show you principles here, not necessarily that this is the only way to do it. So now she's got the block between her ankles. She's going to change the placement of the block, put it up between her thighs. This creates a whole nother form of reference, right? Which is going to be less near the ground, obviously, but because it's at the inner thigh, it's actually going to create a more of an abdominal action, which is also a different important place for reference. So what she tries to do here is squeeze the block and bring her tailbone forward. So there's contrasting instructions that her mind gets to differentiate because of the block. When she does that, she feels a low abdominal lift up, and then she can at the same time hit down through her heels and engage up through her chest. So the change of reference of the block creates a whole different action and consequent sensations, which are why you keep varying the placement of props and reference. So now we're moving to seated poses and using, again, different forms of reference. Again, going back to the grounding video about grounding, the sensation of grounding, there's passive and active. And so what's one of the things especially when you live in a wheelchair, like Sue and I do, the sensation of down, because we're never making direct, or not as often making direct contact with the earth, is a harder sensation to do. So with Sue, we're gonna put sandbags on her feet, but here with Bethany is gonna put sandbags on Poppy's lap, because another place that it's hard to get a lighter sensation, right, is at the base of the spine. So here you got, and notice Amy's putting her hands, and Bethany's put her hands down on the block to give it a little sandbag, to give it a little bit extra. So what you want to do is give the student time to integrate the change in sensation. Remember, don't be in a rush, because the brain picks up subtle sounds, or the mind picks up subtle sounds slowly, right? And then you always try to teach here with contrast, right? So she's got it on here. Now you hit down. Now feel that sense of lightness. Connect to your sitting bones and lightly learn to lift your chest. Hit down through your sitting bones and lightly go beyond the top of your head towards the ceiling and down through your sitting bones down to the floor. Soften the inside of your mouth and your jaw and breathe. So the breathing then adds another layer of reference and movement to something that is inward and more empty. And then we're going to take the sandbag off, and I'm going to give them in time to integrate it without. Same instructions. Hit down, rise up, down to go beyond the top of your head, open to the space. Feel strong. Roll the inner head of the femur bone slightly in. Lift the chest up. Connect to the feet. Breathe. Good. And then release. So now we're going to try to use blocks, because we're going to do the same thing you saw with Amy. Is you're going to take a block and put it between the ankles. Now, I find the block between the ankles with most seated students isn't as effective for activation, right? Because you almost have to really do something funny with your abdomen. But even here, the feeling and the sensation of hitting your heels together, even if you can't feel it, even if I get a block between my heels and I can't feel the block, I still want to be trying to hit my heels together or my ankles together. So feel that. Squeeze in, right? Hit down, rise up, stretch down with your arms. So again, one of the principles is instruct in multiple directions at once for the student. Good. And then release. Take the block now and put it between the knees. Now, I find this one to be more important and more activating when I sit in a chair, right? And so here, because you can kind of get the squeezing action. The thing is, you don't want to over squeeze, right? So you're squeezing into the block, but one of the things you're using the block for is not to just squeeze in one direction, because that'll grip the lower abdomen. You want to squeeze and lengthen down from the inner groin to the inner knee. And when you add the lengthening, just what Sue did naturally, she lifted her chest. Because guess what? This energy and this energy are the same pose. They're the same instruction. It's just on the subtle body. Now, another way to do this is with the belt. You can add a belt here too. Now this adds a whole bunch of complexity, right? And so you're putting the belt, so you got the block there, you're putting the belt, and this is going to give an outer reference, not just an inner reference, right? And this is where, if you didn't have your hands functioning well, trying to use a belt right now would be a bummer for someone with a disability, right? And so the props have some limitations too. So now that instruction gets even more complex. You're squeezing the block in a second, but I actually want them first to hit into the belt and squeeze the block, right? Which actually is going to make if they hit into the belt and squeeze the block, which seems like opposite actions, and it is to the mind. But when you squeeze the block and try to hit into the belt at the same time, there's a lengthening sensation that happens down the femur bone. That's the inside of the pose. Then you hit down through your sitting bones and lift up. Your base changes when you try to do opposite instructions. Opposite instructions are almost impossible for the mind to process. That means you need repetition and practice, and then receive the wisdom from body to mind. This is why you're constantly having opposite instructions, and you need repetition, because over time, it starts to make sense that you can hit into the block and away from the block at the same time. Something happens in the midline then. Ain't yoga crazy? So now we're transitioning to using a belt on the forearm. So they've got, what I want you to notice is that we've got the belts in slightly different places. For most students, it's going to be just below the elbow for what we're going to do. But for Poppy here, because of the one arm that doesn't straighten quite as well, it's above the elbow for now, right? And so what happens here is, again, first you try to, so Poppy and Sue just hit into the belt, right? And that's a strong, willful thing. But now I want you to hit into the belt and away from the belt at the same time. In other words, hit into the belt and lengthen down the inner edge of your arms. Now, I'm figuring that helps you feel your lower abdomen, right? Can you tell that, right? So again, what we're trying to do is use reference and arm work to activate the abdominals, right? Because that's going to help get a sense. So in the belt, away from the belt, find the activation in the abdominals, hit down through the sitting bone, up through the chest, down from the inner groin to the inner knee, down to the inner heel. So right now, arms and legs are entering the same pose with action. Breathe. Good. And then release. We're going to lower the belt now on Poppy, because otherwise what we're going to do, the belt's going to hit her right in the face. Right? She could do this on her own, but we're just expediting a little bit. So now, same action again. Okay? Same action again. And so now Sue has already warned me off camera that she's not going to be able to take her arms overhead. I don't care. All I want is the movement and the activation of the abdominals, and then the connection both up and through her feet. So it's okay that she can't take her arms overhead, right? So hit into the belt, away from the belt. Find the activation in your lower abdomen, hit down through the sitting bones, extend from the inner groin to the inner knee. Lift your chest without overarching your back. Take a breath. Inhale, take your arms up. Keep hitting into the belt and away from the belt at the same time. Activate. Reach into my finger above my head, right? I'm like my hands above your head. Just reach down, hit down through your sitting bone. Get the midline. Use the reference of the belt on your arms to get the midline so you can find the sitting bones, so you can find out through each heel. Breathe. Activate. So this is the way to activate the abdominal region as the rest of the pose is working, and then take the arm down. Now, what's wild is that this works even on me. So both these people can move a little bit more than me in different ways, but that going in and hitting out, activating the lower abdomen, allows for the sensation of awareness down to the feet, which then you start to, in your own practice or when you're facilitating these poses, you hit down and you use that awareness, that subtle body awareness, to actually activate to the poses from the inside to the out. So the reference of the props helps create access to the inside active part of the pose. The movement starts to spread that through the whole body. The recruitment is both of the subtle body and the physical body with the use of props. So now we're transitioning to being on the floor. Now, this isn't just about the relaxation of being on the floor. This is about having the spine also in different reference to the floor. When you're standing up or when you're sitting up, it's vertical in relationship to the floor, which is actually, at a perpendicular, right? And now here you've got the spine horizontal to the floor, so this isn't just about rest. It's about learning the sensations of having your spine in different relationships to gravity, which is itself a form of reference. So here we're going to start to create some activation here with on a horizontal plane, but if she were upright, it would be vertical. So we're going to put blocks. So this feet blocked in her feet, right? But Amy's going to be on the other side of the blocks. Again, this is a non-touch thing, but this would be an example, and we're just explaining, this would be an example of how Poppy could use the wall for this too. But the idea here is for her to realize her own sense of grounding here through the feet. So even though Poppy's balls of her feet are actually pressing into the block, I want you to extend your heels towards the block while feeling in relationship to where the balls are hitting the block. So it's going to make you differentiate the balls of your feet from the heels of your feet and learn to push the heels of your feet underneath the falls of your feet. As you do that, extend the other way through the top of your head. Turn your head slightly, move it slightly this way towards me, the other way. Yep, here. Don't look at me, just like your head's a little bit not on straight, right? All right, so now you're pushing the heels under the balls. You go in the other way, using the reference to help you go the other way. Inhale, take your arms up over your head. So this is just the floor. This could be the wall, but the idea of having reference on both sides, right, and trying to elongate from the inside in multiple directions at once. If you've been watching the other videos, you're hearing me use the language of other principles, other guiding principles of asana, and then release. So now I relieve the block. So now we're going to take the block and put it between the ankles. Right? So is I able to get your leg? Yeah, probably wider like that. So this is going to be asking her to do something more active, right? Which is hit into the block. But remember, Amy did this standing. She's now doing it lying down. Because now by having to squeeze the block, she's activating her legs differently. Try to keep your back body falling towards the floor, even though you're activating your weight. Try to open the skin on the soles of your feet the other way as you hit the block, into the block, and feel the lengthening of the lower abdomen. Inhale, take your arms up over your head. And so you're moving in multiple directions at once with different forms of reference, right? So if we wanted to accentuate this sensation, right, you could belt around the meaty part of the thigh, calves or the thighs, and that would give her more reference from which to learn how to activate in multiple directions at once. What's great about having Poppy do this on the floor is that she's not confronted with the threat of falling. She gets to practice this while the mind gets to be slightly more at ease because the floor is supporting her spine horizontally. So now to add to this, we're going to have Poppy grab this belt here, right? So we're going to fold it up the belt, and we're just using another form of reference to make her connect, right? Now she's going to now, before she does the most hardest part of the pose, I want her to feel what's happening between her hands, between her feet. Now I want you to connect your elbows together. Don't even move, just find where your elbow pits are in relationship to the contact of your feet, right? Now inhale, take your arms over your head. So now she's got added reference for the mind to learn how to recruit and let in the sensation of squeezing the block, lengthening out through the heels, right? The floor is still there. You're going through, you're having reference up here, and you're letting the river fill in between. And then the current goes in both directions, Poppy. The current actually goes this way and this way. And you work to receive both. Breathe as a form of resting. Inhale. Exhale, grow even longer from the back body out through your heels and out through the top of your head, especially on exhalation. Good. You're actually doing it. I can see it happen. Good. And then release. So here we are back to a setup that is like Shavasana, but it's also a passive chest opening. So it's activating. And we've taken time to get Poppy set up with props. So there's more of a buildup on this arm because her arm can't straighten out. But the most important part is she has a bolster on her chest. And so the center of her chest is getting supported, and gravity is helping the feeling of sensation of a falling open out through her arms, right? So this, by the way, in my practice, starting 31 years ago, passive chest openings showed me so much about how to be in my legs. Now, that mystery of why that's true, I can barely put to words, but I'm telling you, this is how I learned that a lifted chest is in every single pose, because I learned it from reference through my subtlety into activation. So what we're going to do to try to enhance this supported lifted chest with the use of props, Amy's going to put at first a grounding sandbag over the shins. And this is going to have that calming effect. They're like, oh. And one thing about props reveal to you is that you didn't even know you were holding your legs up off the floor. Even though they're on the floor, part of you is holding them up. We're going to put another sandbag now over her thighs. And again, to show you that there's more potential in an action that you already thought you were doing, that your mind was only acting upon part of the experience. The brain is getting all of the input. The mind needs reference to recruit more. And then we're going to add one more thing to get her chest open. Now, this is part of this kind of passive chest opening in this position was part of how I learned shoulder stand and the sensations in shoulder stand. But that's for something else. So here, Amy's gonna, right now we're just setting her up for what would be like coming into a warm bath, right? Of just feeling good, because now the space here is getting reference so she can feel the emptiness. Instead of being rolled forward, she's getting rolled open, which actually reveals to her, Poppy, to an opening of the side armpit chest. Feel the sandbag here on your thighs. So the openness of the center of the chest, the side armpit chest connected to the grounding on the thighs, connected to the grounding on the shins. This is part of what shoulder stand is teaching a practitioner. Sarvangasana is how to be open here and letting the awareness travel through the legs. We just happen to be doing it passively here with props. This can be, as long as her low back isn't being sore here, this could also work as a form of Shavasana. This could also be done without all the setup and just lying on a bolster. The props are just incremental improvements into a core realization of the inner emptiness that can come through an expanded sensation that's simultaneously landing back towards the earth.